Welcome to the GRN, the Growth and Resilience Network, where every episode brings you targeted stories and strategies about professional and personal growth and resilience. The intent of each episode is to educate, energize, and equip you with information and hopefully a bit of wisdom to apply in your life and within your community. Hi, I'm Steve Piscitelli, your host, coming to you from my headquarters, my world headquarters here in Atlantic Beach, Florida. 1881, Mark Twain said, and I quote, "A day will come when, in the eye of the law, literary property will be as sacred as whiskey or any other of the necessaries of life," end of quote. Currently, ASCAP, the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers, is involved with some heavy hitters in the music industry to see what they can do to get more money to go back into the pockets of songwriters. And so today we're going to be traveling down the road of, I believe we'll call it innovation law. But we have two very important guests in the studio today. It's Camille Wilson and Fernando Dutra. They are the founders of the Wilson-Dutra law firm, Innovation Law. I told them before we went on mic, they sound like a rock group, don't they? The Wilson-Dutra Band. And really, that sounds pretty cool. When you look at their website, which is wilson-dutra, DUTRA.com, you'll see one being described as having stage presence and another being described as having palpable enthusiasm for innovation. So you can decide which of the two those describe. More importantly, and really selfishly, for me, is these two helped me navigate the United States Patent Office over the last couple of years as we registered, and yes, I finally do have a registered trademark for the Growth and Resilience Network. They told me it would take between a year and two, and it was right at about a year and a half. And so anyway, Fernando and Camille, we are glad to have you in here today.
Hello, Steve. Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
This is great. We're excited to have you here. And we even have Roxy, the wonder dog, right here at our feet, making sure we don't do anything inappropriate. So we could go in so many directions, but I know you refer to yourselves as a virtual law firm. So I thought maybe tell us a little bit about your journey as attorneys, why innovation law, and maybe a little bit about what that means. But this idea of virtual law, we're not going, when I met with them, in fact, folks, I never met them face to face until they delivered my registered trademark to me. Everything was done online, on the phone. It was phenomenal, really. It was really cool and so different. So I'll open it up. Whoever wants to go first.
I like to start just by saying we're actually holograms. We're not in the headquarters right now.
We're not actually here right now.
Have you trademarked those?
I guess I'll start with the shorter question. Why innovation law?
Okay.
So for both of us, we both started off in engineering.
In engineering.
Wow. And actually, Fernando's story starts even earlier on as far as when he fell in love with intellectual property. I fell in love with it in law school. And after that point, I knew I didn't want to do any other type of law. I took some intellectual property classes, particularly patent law, and I fell in love with it, and I knew that is what I want to do. And I was fortunate that I qualified to take the patent bar, to become a patent attorney.
What was it that just hooked you? Why that law?
So I guess because it captured everything I loved about, well, the law, but mostly because it involved so much writing, which I love doing, and it involved being on the cutting edge. And you get to work with just these brilliant, excited people. And even before I got into it, I could tell that just by, like, our professor, for instance. Our professor was a patent attorney, and he was involved in a lot of really interesting innovations, and you can tell how excited he was about it. And I was like, wow, and he's he was retired at that point. And if he's still excited at that point, I was like, this is going to be a great career.
And he was involved in a very unique subset of patent law,
Yes.
which was plant patents.
And genetics. And genetics,
Wow.
yeah.
So you have to be really passionate
Yeah.
to still carry that and translate that enthusiasm.
And very smart.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
Very, very smart. You want to add to that, Fernando?
Sure. So for me, it's a winding road and journey. But before going to college and undergrad, I knew that I wanted to be an attorney, and I knew I wanted to work in intellectual property. Undergrad for me was just a journey of figuring out how to get to that route.
Gotcha.
So I kind of reverse engineered where to go.
And that's an important, aside from what we're talking about today with the old teacher and me, that's such an important message for students. That undergraduate time, time of curiosity.
Right.
Asking yourself, what are you passionate about? Rather than, what am I really going beyond, what am I passionate about, but what am I curious about?
Right.
Cool. Okay.
So for me, I knew it involved the law, and I knew it involved intellectual property, but I didn't know how those two came together necessarily. I didn't know anything about patent attorneys. I didn't know anything about trademarks. I kind of knew about copyright just because of my interests in entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew there was something there, and undergrad, I basically spent 4 years discovering how to do that.
Yeah. And then after, so his was, like you said, a more winding road. For me, right out of law school, I started working in patents. I started working with a local Fortune 50 company, and I got to work with the R&D team and just generate patent applications, which was just a fantastic opportunity that I loved. But it was a contract position, so it was finite. And as it started coming to an end, I started working with other local patent attorneys and kind of figuring out what that felt like going into this private sector of just being a law firm. Mm-hmm. And that's actually how we ended up working together again, because he was in litigation and I was involved. I started getting involved in a project that was.
So I basically ended up not doing what I wanted to do
Yes.
straight out of law school. I was in upstate New York doing litigation work, personal injury, commercial transactions, bankruptcy law, and I was pretty miserable. And not to say that it also gets dark there in the winter at around like 3:30, and I'm looking out at the office window, just a pure darkness, arriving to the office in the dark and leaving in the dark. And then Camille comes along with this great idea for me to bring me down back to Florida to help her work on some cases.
And what about virtual? Tell us a little bit about that.
So that's actually part of. So when he came down, actually part of the project we worked on together separately when he was still in New York. And
So you're saying it started virtual since the inception?
it did. It started virtual.
That is cool.
And because of that, we're like, well, if it worked for us to be working long distance, it makes sense that it could potentially work for our clients. And on top of that, intellectual property, particularly trademarks and patents, is unique. They're unique in the sense that they are federal. So we can be a national firm. Mm-hmm. And we are, and we have clients all over the country. And it doesn't make sense for us to force a client in New York to come down and see us in our office.
Right.
Not only does it not make sense, it doesn't even benefit anyone. Mm-hmm. So that's part of our motivation, because what we want for our clients is for them to be comfortable. Mm-hmm. And we've noticed that things that make people uncomfortable are having to slog through 30 minutes of traffic to get somewhere, or having to disrupt their day.
Yeah.
And if we can fix that by just going to them, that was our way of making our clients comfortable.
Now, here's another piece to this. Because when I first, another attorney of mine, when I had reached out, when I was thinking about doing this, he said, I don't do this, but I know two people who do. All right, now, in this day and time when people can get scammed so badly over the internet, I mean, I did some due diligence. I trusted my attorney. At the same time, I went to it was the Florida Bar site to check to see, yeah, there they are, okay. And there were no complaints, and it was all good.
They're real.
So I guess the question then becomes, if someone's going to do business with a virtual law firm, and there's two questions here going different, kind of the same direction, but one is this a wave of the future? Is this a weak signal for the future when it comes to law firms, especially with younger attorneys who aren't mired in what's supposedly a best practice of a big office and lots of cushy furniture and secretaries? So what you're doing, is it a weak signal? And how can your potential client protect themselves, do due diligence to find out really who you are, since they're not seeing you?
So for the first part, as whether it's the wave of the future, I think yes, in a way. I don't know if a complete virtual law firm makes sense for a lot of types of law. Specific types of law, you might want to be in an office where you feel more comfortable, especially if it's a really emotional type of law. But I think particularly not just for clients, but for the workforce, it makes sense that flexibility gets worked into law firms. And even now you see it even with bigger law firms that have the traditional brick and mortar, the mahogany everywhere and the leather seats, the conference room with 16 seats and this huge table. Even them, they are starting to hire people that they allow to work remotely. Because working remotely just gives people a sense of a better work-life balance.
Yeah.
And a little more control over their lives, and that seems to benefit.
Right. And I think the trends you see happening outside of the law will soon trickle into the law as they see success in other arenas. So hearing about people working remotely from home and the company's still doing well, still being successful, I think they'll do that. Right now I see it in big law firms and opening satellite offices. Right? Maybe in the future they don't open a satellite office anymore. They just have someone that's based in that location that can just interact locally without needing to rent a space.
Do you find from even a more practical for the client, that it becomes, you're able to have more reasonable, affordable fees because you're not supporting a huge overhead? I mean, does that come into the play or not, or is that just... that's just nice collateral information to have?
It's a little bit of both. I think early on, being virtual allows you to start out without having that type of overhead.
Yeah.
I do think you will have to supplement a little bit of your overhead to be virtual successfully, because you're basically going to be replacing the office with technology.
Sure.
So to your second question, how do people do their due diligence, find you reliable? You're going to be building up your web presence, the resources that they can go to when they research you. They go to your website. Are there blog articles? Are you on social media? Do you have since you don't have a physical presence, do you have some sort of online presence?
And is there a place I can go that you didn't put up?
Yes.
I went to the Florida Bar site,
right,
and I didn't know what I was doing, but I did some searching. But are there places like that online where a potential client, whether you're virtual or not, really, could go to and say, hey, I want to know about this wilson-dutra?
So each state bar will have a record of an attorney that's admitted in that state. So if you see on the website, Fernando Dutra is admitted in New York, New Jersey, Florida, you can go to those states and double check to make sure that's actually true. Are they in good standing? And then for the United States Patent and Trademark Office with Camille, you can also go to the website there and say, is she a patent attorney?
Yeah. Okay, great. Right. And then word of mouth.
Right.
It's really great. I mean, there's a friend of mine who I did a podcast with some time ago on this channel, and he is now, I believe, going to be working with you. He's out here at the beach.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Yes.
And he's going to work with you on a trademark. He reached out to me. And so, I mean, that's paying attention to that. All right, let's move into, unless you have more to talk about that.
I will note that one thing so a brick and mortar gives someone some sort of legitimacy. Like, people walk in and they're like, oh, this is a nice office. I assume you're somewhat successful. So
are you saying it's a perceived legitimacy?
Yes, it is a perceived legitimacy. When you're virtual, you rely a lot more heavily on reputation.
Yeah.
So people don't get the impression of anything when they walk in your door because they don't walk in your door.
Right.
So you have to be really careful about the quality of work you turn out
And
and your reputation.
Yeah. And I have to say, the stereotype I carried into it when I got the recommendation was, okay, they don't have a lot of track experience yet because you're young, you're new in this. So there was a stereotype which proved to be totally inaccurate.
Oh,
but
thank
it was
goodness.
a stereotype that I had. And then again, it was like there's not that physical thing, so I had to work through that. And I was so glad I did. But the big thing was I did have a respected attorney who had done work for me recommend the both of you. So that's something else out to the audience. Pay attention.
Right.
To who's sending you people.
So just because you don't have a physical space doesn't mean that the networking that normally goes with a profession
Exactly.
doesn't accompany that.
Okay, then let's go into this idea of innovation law, intellectual property. You like working, one of the things you had said that there was these brilliant, excited people that drew you into innovation law. One of the questions I had is that, I mean, I've copywritten everything I've ever done. I now have trademarked, and I know you don't do copyright. You might just briefly touch on that for the audience without losing us in the legalese.
Sure.
But there is a difference, I understand. But what is when you look at the creative types you've worked with, or maybe haven't but you observe, is there a one biggest mistake that they make, that they commit when it comes to either copyright, registered trademarks, patents, what have you, when it's their intellectual property?
The biggest mistake that we come across is not doing anything.
Not doing anything.
Inactivity. Just, I've developed something, I've created my brand, I've, written a song, and I just take it for granted that it's mine. And I haven't taken any steps just to make sure that, GRN, does anyone have that name already out there, before I spend all my money investing in growing this brand.
Exactly.
I've written a song, and maybe I wrote it with other people. Who owns the song, right? You just take it for granted that, this is a community effort, and we're all working together, and if this becomes a #1 hit on the radio, we'll all share in the revenue. But right.
Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest that we come across is just.
And then for the patent side, when someone invents something, they're like, a lot of times they say, oh, once it starts getting big and getting traction, that's when I'll start patenting it. And by that time, it might be too late. So being reactive is just never the best choice. And that's part of the inactivity.
Yeah.
Right.
Because a lot of people come to us when the issue is forced, whether they get a cease and desist letter, or they're looking for investors who expect there to be some intellectual property to back up their concepts.
Gotcha.
And then at that point, it's, well, we have to do what we can with what you've done.
So we prefer happy and excited clients, not panicking clients, right? It's a completely different dynamic.
Yeah.
Based on where they are in that trajectory.
All right, and then briefly, for as an education for folks listening, copyright. When does somebody, and I know that's not your area, but just generally speaking, when does somebody need to do that? When should they copyright, and what does it give them? So I wrote a song.
Okay.
Should I copyright it? What does it give me?
I can go through the three really quickly.
Okay.
Really quickly. So copyright is any tangible work, creative work in a tangible form. Sorry, creative work in a tangible form.
There you go.
There you go. So if you have a song, you write it down, write the lyrics, that might be one part. You write the music portion, that might be another part. You record it, that might be a different part. And those are all, that could be different people.
Yeah.
The things that is interesting about copyright is that you get it automatically. So as soon as you write it down, as soon as you type up the software code, that establishes a copyright. To really defend it,
or enforce it.
Yes.
Right.
You need to file it. And it's not like patents where you have to get it approved. You're literally just putting it into a register.
Yeah, and it's not that expensive.
No.
No. $35, $50, $55 maybe.
Yeah, and then
last
you can
time I did it.
And you can do
So,
package deals.
yes,
So
yeah.
there's like, it
And you
definitely
can do
benefits.
it yourself. You don't need an attorney to do that. You could do it online.
You know, if any attorneys are listening to this recording, they might not like the answer that we're about to give.
If you are someone that has like, you know, here and there type copyright,
Or you're budget conscious.
yes, we definitely see that it makes sense for you to do it yourself. If you are building your career around copyright, potentially licensing it, it does make sense to consult with an attorney, just so that you have some guidance on what makes sense.
What about the old advice? You write it down, you put it in an envelope, you mail it to yourself. In fact, I did that way years ago, and the lady at the clerk at the post office said, well, you know, that's not good enough. I said, really? She goes, you have to send it registered mail to yourself, so you sign it. So I started doing that, which made it a little bit more expensive. Is that worth anything?
It's called the poor man's copyright, and when it's so simple to file your copyright, to register it officially with the government,
If you're
may
paying
as well just
$10 for your registered mail, might as well pay an extra like $15, $20
Yes.
to do the
Get it
copyright.
registered.
yes.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess that also has the official registration has more legs, more legal legs.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, did you hit all 3 points? I'm sorry. I
No, okay,
interrupted
so
you.
that was copyright. Trademark is branding. So anything, you have your logo, your company name, product names, things like that. Like for instance, for Nike, Nike has the name Nike, they have the swoosh, and they have Just Do It.
Why do you go with Nike? We have the Growth and Resilience Network here.
That's true. That's true.
You see why I love these?
And trademarks can be earned organically, where you don't have to register them.
Explain.
So if you, let's say you have a logo, and you start selling, or you start with a restaurant locally,
Okay.
you can earn some form of protection locally. So wherever your reputation grows to, you can earn some sort of protection that way.
Does one have to be able to prove that? Is there a longevity involved with that?
It ends up being, a little bit of, it becomes more expensive to fight just because you have to prove that you've been around, that people actually know you.
Right.
Whereas if you file for it, like what you did with the registration, when you file for it, you are looking for a presumption of national awareness.
Yeah. Okay.
So even though you might be in 3 states at the time, you're presumed to have a national presence.
Right.
And that way, that local company can't pop up in California.
Well, and then what was interesting when I went through the process with you, because I didn't know this, was that I was doing a trademark. Initially, was for the podcasting that I'm doing, but then it was like, well, you could do something with the writing, and you can do something with your speaking, and so there become, I don't know if you call them different industries, but or at least different categories that one can trademark in. So I'm thinking about so many friends I know that are professional musicians and entertainers. I mean, I guess they could have a trademark if they wanted to that brands their band.
They could.
And then it could be, it goes to their lyrics and their music and their videos. And
So those are 2 different ones.
Oh,
So the name of the band could potentially be that, like Wilson-dutra, the rock band. That'd be great trademark name. Creating goes,
I think you need to get on that.
but then the music that they're creating goes back to the copyright form
okay.
of it.
Exactly.
So 2 different forms of intellectual property there. And then what you were talking about is there are different classes. So when you file for a trademark application, you kind of have to describe what you're doing. And part of that process is, what is the Growth and Resilience Network? What do you consider what you're doing, right? And podcasting was a part of it, so that's one class. But then you speaking and giving lectures is a completely different aspect of your trademark.
And then books
Right.
can be a different, like publishing with that can be something else.
Right. And sometimes they overlap and it fits in one class, but for the most part, it might be
And
separate.
I know we still have to get the patent. I think that was your number 3, right?
Yeah,
Number four?
and I will say the band aspect, because sometimes, a band gets traction, and like Jimmy Buffett, he was started off as a singer. He was in music, and now the Margaritaville brand. I mean, I think it's like a resort. He has tons of things.
Are
So
you saying every musician wants to have a Margaritaville?
I'm saying that it could potentially branch out if you have like a lifestyle associated with your music, then it could become a branding thing.
Yeah.
It can go from copyright to branding.
Excellent point. Yeah.
Patents.
Oh, patents. Patents are innovations, basically. And that includes products, ways to manufacture things, processes, things like that. It potentially can include some software applications, although that's a little more contentious now. But what's really important about patents is that you have to file for them. And if you're publicly disclosing it, like if you're out and about doing conferences or you're doing trade shows, you have exactly 1 year.
So, you've created a new type of guitar and you're playing on stage every night showing this new version of a guitar. After a year,
you lose the right.
You basically cannot file for patent protection.
Wow.
And unlike copyright's technically finite, but it's a long time. It's like 70 years or 120 years. Trademark can go on perpetually as long as you're still using the brand.
Right.
Patents are finite. They are either 14 or 15 years if it's design. Or 20 years if it's utility. And the theory behind it is, in exchange for telling the world how you're doing this new, either you're creating how you're doing the manufacturing or this new product, you get 20 years of a monopoly. That's the kind of give and take for patents.
Would that be like in the drug industry? I mean, are drugs, when they first come out, patented?
Oh, yes.
And then 20 years later, they become generic? Is that?
Absolutely.
That
yes.
is a great example, because the day generics come out, that is when their patent ran out. And you can tell when a company is trying to a pharmaceutical company is trying to extend their sway over the market, because they will come out with different versions. So they'll have a regular version for a medication, and then they'll come up with like an extended release version. Then only that company can still do the extended release, and they'll do different iterations on it. And that's a way for them to try and extend.
I think Roxy was trying to tell us that she was going to sleep.
Yeah, I don't know if that came out. Either that or she was just so excited. I don't know.
And there is a fourth type of intellectual property, trade secrets, but I don't know how much you want us to go into
Trade secrets?
Yeah. And it sounds really...
we can't talk about it because it's a
I
trade
know,
secret.
it sounds very exciting. But everyone has trade secrets. Every company does. Whether you...
The secret sauce.
It is a secret sauce.
Yeah.
So it's recipes or customer lists or algorithms behind your software.
Okay.
And those are tricky because you have to do a lot to make sure that nobody figures out your trade secret. But you don't actually file on them per se.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. This as we move toward the end of this, now one thing at the very end, if there's something that I have missed that you or we just didn't cover and you want to make sure you get it out, you'll have your time. Okay. Since we do talk about resilience on this channel, you're starting in a new business. I mean, you've been going now 4 years. Is it about 4?
For the company?
Yeah, Wilson-dutra.
So Wilson-dutra,
3?
2 or 3.
3.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
In this iteration.
how do you stay resilient yourselves in this business? What do you do?
So I'd say the most difficult part that you actually have to have some sort of resilience for us particularly is that we try to be different. We try not to be what people think of as a stereotypical attorney. We try to have fun. We try to be very collaborative, and we try to make it a great experience for our clients. We want them to be, we want them to stay excited about their innovation or whatever they're doing. We want them to be passionate, and we want to fuel that.
Yeah.
So oftentimes if we working with other attorneys or being around a lot of other attorneys, it doesn't fit that mold. So what we have to do is just stay true to ourselves, which is harder than you'd expect when you're surrounded by, the stereotypical attorney got that reputation for a reason. And it makes sense for other types of law.
Yeah.
A lot of types of laws, they're adversarial.
Well, that's an interesting point, and there's another rabbit hole we could go for.
We need another hour, Steve.
Yeah, there's a stereotype of the starving creative artist, and then there's the stereotype, which you were just alluding to, of that attorney who will charge you $15 a minute to answer an email or more.
I've never heard that happen.
I'll show you one. Not from you two. That's for sure. That never happened. How do you reconcile those two stereotypes? How have you, Wilson-Dutra, done that? Because I think a lot of folks that I know that are musicians, it's one, they just don't do it for whatever reason. It could be inertia. It could be, it's too expensive. I don't need to do that. I mailed it to myself. Whatever the excuse or the reason. And some of it is, I just don't have that money. So is there a way to reconcile that, or what? I mean, because you were going toward the stereotype.
So there are a few things. I think going back to that beginning conversation about the changing tide of law practice, I think more and more as the years go on, lawyers see that clients aren't reacting well to the hourly rates, right? Minute rates. So for us, we kind of framed the firm around that sort of quandary that we saw popping up, in that we just do flat fees. You know exactly how much it'll cost before we do it, and we go from there.
And that was wonderful. Speaking personally,
and since
we no surprises,
right?
No surprises.
And since we work with startups for the most part, we know they're on a set budget. We know that they need to plan. They have every intention of doing something. We want to facilitate that. We want to make that as easy as possible,
yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And then to the second point, word of mouth. So the starving artist might not approach someone like us because they have that perception for a law office. But if you talk to someone or a referring attorney that they already have a relationship with, which was your case.
And hopefully a podcast like this gets that message out to folks. I mean, that's the hope.
But the most important thing in that situation is finding someone that you would like to work with.
Sure.
Right? Yeah. So the starving artists, it's just a matter of time for them to find an attorney that they actually like to work with.
Relationship.
Right.
Yeah, and for intellectual property, almost all types, it's a long-term relationship.
Yeah.
And we always recommend, if you don't feel comfortable with us, you want to speak to other attorneys, please do, because, this is going to be, years and years of communication. And if you don't feel like you can communicate with your attorney, then it's not going to be one that benefits you.
Right.
I always ask the question, would you invite us on your podcast?
Yeah.
Because if the answer to that question is no.
Yeah, here you are. You got my rocks. Yeah, that's important. And just take the trademark. In 5-10 years, we're going to have to do something.
We will.
Right.
And so so it is ongoing.
Yep.
Yeah. Great. All right. Let's go a final call to action. If you had to leave our creative types out there with something, or maybe there's somebody listening who's not a creative type but is the parent of one, or a friend, or somehow connected with one, is there something you want to leave them with, even if it's taking something you've said already and just putting it into a little package with a bow and said, keep this in mind?
I would say be proactive. Make everything that if you have any intention of doing anything with it, whether that's, you're intending to pursue a business around it, or you're like, if you're creating a band or anything like that, make decisions. Mm-hmm. And they don't have to be expensive decisions. They just have to be deliberate ones.
Right.
You can say, when we meet with people, there's a decision. Do I patent it or do I not? The answer is, there's no correct answer. The correct answer is to make an answer. The only wrong decisions about intellectual property are the ones you don't make.
Yeah. Good point.
So even, especially for copyright, they're like you said, it's not exceedingly expensive. It can be if, for instance, you have a very successful band, and then all of a sudden you have a squeaky wheel who left the band and wants royalties now.
Right.
That suddenly becomes very expensive. Whereas if you did some due diligence early on, it probably wouldn't be that much. It'd be a fraction.
Mm-hmm. And to that end, any creative types out there, be aware of what you're doing. You're creating, and see the value in what you're creating. And also as you create, think about what's worth pursuing, what's not.
Okay, excellent. All right, since I have you on the stand, I will leave with a question that I didn't even tell you that we would even look at.
Oh, no.
All right, we walk into a grocery store, and we're walking down an aisle. You're a product in that grocery store. Where do I find you?
Is there an essentials aisle?
Camille, can you top that one?
No, I can't.
So there you have it, you creative types. The Wilson-Dutra Band Law Firm Essentials, right there. I love it. All right, thank you for joining us. This has been fun, always instructive. And folks, take Camille and Fernando's practical message and the call to action to heart. Do something, especially if you're a creative type or you know someone out there who is. Share this podcast with them. And as soon as you can, take a moment, think about what they shared, take a few notes, and what Camille said a number of times, be proactive. Be proactive. Don't forget, go to their website, wilson-dutra, DUTRA.com for more information, and you'll get to see them as well. And I really do appreciate you folks being here. And visit my website, stevepiscitelli.com, for more information about upcoming conversations on the GRN and about my programs and other resources for your personal growth and resilience. And while at my website, it's very easy for you to find so many other resources that you can use for you, your colleagues, teachers. There are a lot there for your students as well. So until we meet again, either virtually or somewhere in person around this great nation, this is Steve Piscitelli. Here in Atlantic Beach, Florida, reminding all of us to choose well, live well, and be well, and continue to create, share, and savor powerful moments. Bye-bye, folks. That wasn't too bad, folks. You're good on the stand.
You didn't ask